came through Jan Opperman's brother, Jay. Tell us about that.
Well, Jay just realized that, or Jan did realize that these race cars weren't welded up good enough and safe, and he wanted a good welder to weld them up, and I was a certified welder, and so Jay got me involved with Jan, who I knew of, but I didn't really know that well, and it just took off from there, 64.
I know you told me an interesting story about your first meeting with Jan Opperman. You've got to share that with the group.
Yeah, one day Jay and I were out feeding some horses that the Oppermans had out on the farm, and Jan was out there with his high school football player buddies, and they attacked us and held us down and rubbed horse manure in our face. and that's how mean Jan was. But yeah, it was quite an experience.
An interesting introduction, but a long-time friendship.
Very long time. Jan, it was obvious right from the beginning that Jan Opperman was fast. He could go fast in nothing. You know what I mean? You give him a bad car and he was quick, and owners were afraid of him, including Bill Smith, because he'd wad them up, but at the same time he could win races. And when you worked with Jan, when you went to the racetrack, you were subject to win every time you showed up. And that was what he expected, and that was what the people that worked with him expected.
Coming from a welding background, and all of a sudden you were thrust into super modified and sprint car racing. Talk about that transition. Obviously, it was something that was new to you that you kind of had to learn on the fly.
That's true. I was around a lot of smart people like Don Maxwell. Probably one of the people that helped me the most with sprint cars was a guy named John Singer, who resides in Missouri and is a top mechanic, and he knew race cars better than most people did at the time. He was kind of like a Charlie Martin. He was a man that you listened to and you did what they said, and sprint car racing is an addictive thing, and it's a passionate, and it was a blood sport, and I just couldn't believe that these guys would get in wrecks, and the first thing they'd be bleeding all over the place, and the first thing they'd say is, "How's the car?" They wanted to know how that car was, and that was part of the deal with the seats. When you see drivers get hurt, then you want to make it so they don't get hurt, and so you try to think ahead and get it right.
And obviously, following Jan Opperman around, you certainly saw your share of wrecks on the racetrack. What led you from basically being a fabricator and welding sprint car chassis? What kind of led you in the direction of seat building?
There was no one else doing it. It's just plain and simple. They were sitting in fiberglass seats, which were very unsafe. The bolts would pull through the seat in the first impact, and then the seat's loose, and so the harnesses are loose, so the driver's loose, and I realized it right away that they needed help, and that was, and then I had a lot of good people around me, guys like Don Maxwell, to steer me in the right direction when I wasn't right. And it was a natural, it's like if you want to be a movie star, move to Hollywood. If you want to be a sprint car driver, get good equipment and do that thing, so it was just a natural. It really was. It was just purely passion and loving the sport and wanting to see it safe, as you can. And I had plenty of people call me back.
Many, many years ago, there was a youngster who was born and raised in the state of California, ended up moving to Indiana, and you told me a story about this young man and how interesting it was building sprint car seats for a guy of his stature, and how that led you to be involved with a lot of other younger sprint car drivers in fabricating seats that would make them safe as well. Tell us that story.
Jeff Gordon was 12 or 13 years old, and he couldn't race in California, so his stepfather moved him to Brownsburg, Indiana, and he got hooked up with Lee Osborne, and Lee Osborne built a race car for him, but he didn't want to build the seat because they're hard to build. And he called me and asked me to build the seat, and when he gave me the measurements, I couldn't believe the size of this guy. It was a 12-inch wide seat, you know. It was like building a seat for about a 9-year-old. And after I built the seat, you know, of course, we didn't know Jeff Gordon was going to be what he was, but after I built the seat, I saved the template, and I started building seats for the guys that raced out of Waverly, the kids, the 8- and 9-year-olds, and the templates fit them perfect, you know. So I kept on thinking, like, boy, this guy's really going to be surprised when, you know, a guy this size of a sprint car with a good-sized motor in it, when he floors it, it would be really quite a thrill. And obviously he went on to great stardom, as we know.
One thing that we would be remiss if we didn't talk about is the way you manufacture the seat. Obviously, the companies like Kirky and those companies today that are very involved in seat building, it pretty much is a mass production type product. What you were doing was completely different from what those big manufacturers do today.
Yeah, actually, the way that we built seats was there was a guy named Hank Henry who was a fabricator that worked at Indy in May, and then the rest of the year he raced cars. And Don Maxwell, who had a photographic memory, went and looked at one of his seats, and he built one. And he started building those seats, and he taught me how to build them, and that's how the whole thing really got started. You know, a lot of seats down the road. You know what I mean? And there's thousands. I don't know if anybody's driven a sprint car in the last 30 years. They probably sat in one of my seats. You know, and they're just. I'm still building them.
And every one of those was custom built and built by hand, pretty much.
Pretty much so. I would get right measurements. I can take measurements over the phone and pretty much pin you. You know, if you give me your chest under the arm and, you know, how tall you are and your size, I can build the seat and send it to you. I've never gotten one back, so I guess it was okay. And I've gotten plenty of compliments, and then I've gotten plenty of complaints because people thought the price was too high. But that's racers. They're always looking for a deal, you know.
I know you mentioned you're still building some seats today. What else? What other types of things are you involved in? What keeps you going?
Seats and artwork, but seats is the main thing. I sell seats all over the world now. Sports car seats, for hot rods. It's just a business now. It's on the internet, and it's still going. I'm in my 70s, and I'm glad I'm still working.
Well, it certainly is a pleasure to introduce you as a member of the 2014 class of the Nebraska Auto Racing Hall of Fame. Congratulations, Randy.
Thank you.
Our next inductee into the 2014 class of the Nebraska Auto Racing Hall of Fame is Buck Houston. Buck will be inducted into the Hall of Fame as a driver. Buck Houston's racing career began quite by accident when he was 16 years old. He was working with a traveling carnival following the county fair circuit through Nebraska, Kansas, Colorado, Oklahoma, and